Today I'm talking with Blue Andrews. Blue recently wrote a book called Choosing Life. It's a memoir about his battle through alcoholism and depression. And Blue's also started a website called Creed's Living, which gives people that have alcoholism and depression another avenue of help to find. I love Blue and his story. I've actually known Blue for a couple of years now through the yoga community, but did not know the battle that he had been fighting internally until I read his book. And that's one of the reasons I love this podcast and the reasons I started this podcast is that we don't know how strong and how influential the people that are naturally around us in our life can be until we have an opportunity to ask them about that. And so I'd known Blue for probably 3 years before he told me he wrote this book. And I had an opportunity to sit down and read it and found that it reflected a lot with my own personal journey and the struggles that I've had in life. So really excited for Blue to be here. Really looking forward to the vulnerable conversation that we'll have about his journey, about my journey, and about alcoholism in general. Hope you get something out of the show. We'll see you on the other side. But first, a message from our sponsor. Our healing journey can be difficult and might feel lonely at times. That's why I love sound baths. Where we can get together in a community, we intrinsically support and feel supported by others. And that combined energy can help us go deeper into our own healing journeys. And all you have to do is just lay there for 1 hour and listen to beautiful healing sounds. I'm a sound healing practitioner, and I hold sound baths on a regular basis in the greater Seattle area. You can find my next sound baths on my website at adamrealhealing.com. That's Adam, A-D-A-M, Real, R-I-E-H-L, Healing, Healing.com. AdamRealHealing.com. Your healing is worth your time. And now an uninterrupted podcast with Blue Andrews. All right, welcome back to our show. Today I'm sitting across from a friend of mine named Blue Andrews. So Blue and I have kind of known each other through yoga for a number of years now, probably about 3 or 4 years, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And I always loved having you in class, and I always loved the chit chat that we had. And about a month ago, Blue reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've written this book a while back. It's called Choosing Life: A Man's Journey Through Alcoholism, Depression, to Wellness and Self-Discovery." And it's a memoir that he wrote about his life. And so immediately I'm like, yes, I'm an avid reader. I love to read. And so I chewed through his book, and it's one of the most moving books that I've read in a while. One, because of the vulnerability that you share about your experience, but also it spoke to me in a very deep way. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But also, along with the book that Blue has written, he's also started a website and a movement called Creed's Living. Creed's is an acronym that we'll get into in a few minutes as well. But all of this together is basically helping people understand that alcoholism is a thing, what some of the steps that you've gone through to find your way through depression into a more balanced and happy life, understanding where you're at, and some of the struggles that might have come with that. And so, again, so for me, having a lot of personal just reflection in this book and also wanting to write a book myself about some of my stuff that I've gone through, this was very inspirational to me. And cool. So, Blue, thank you so much for being here, brother.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, I feel the same. I feel the same way. We haven't had too many long conversations around the yoga studio, but it's always just uplifting to see you and hear your voice. So thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you, man.
Yeah.
So you've been through quite a bit, right? According to your book. And again, thank you for your vulnerability. I know it takes a lot to just put everything out there like that. But do you mind talking about kind of your journey through what you've gone through, what brought you to write this book, and some of the struggles that you've gone through to get to that point?
Yeah. So, where do I start? So in my teens and into my 20s, I suffered some loss, from a negligent father to friends dying at a young age, just shocking out of nowhere. Mom, another close friend that was family. So I went through that loss and I was grieving. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I learned that I was a pretty good drinker of alcohol. Uh-huh. And so I was drinking a lot, and that became a big part of my life during my 20s. and into my 30s, the the grieving and the fun partying part of alcohol digressed
Mm.
to depression and the ugly side of drinking,
Mm.
and alcoholism really kicked in. And by the time my late 30s and I hit age 40, it had the depression and the alcoholism had just taken over and overwhelmed me.
Yeah.
And after, so about my late 30s, I went from grieving and being depressed to really having depression.
Capital D, big depression.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like it was a physical manifestation and it was taking over my life to the point that shortly after my 41st birthday, I tried to take my own life.
Mm.
And I spent time in the hospital and I spent time in rehab. And I knew that I needed to stop drinking. And that just cleared the path for me to address my depression in my mind. That's how I looked at it.
Yeah.
And so then I began the journey of understanding my depression, understanding me. And one of the ways that I went through that introspection, reflection was through writing
Mm.
and reading and talking and listening and then writing about it.
Yeah.
And as I was writing, I had this idea for a book, and it took me 10 years from the initial idea. I found a document that had this seed that then evolved into 2 or 3 different iterations
Uh-huh.
to what is out today. But that was a 10-year process of writing and revising and figuring out what I wanted the book to say.
Yeah.
And then what really has pushed me to say, okay, I'm taking all this writing, I want to turn it into a book and publish a book,
Mm-hmm.
was the research that I did on depression, suicide attempts, the demographics. I'm a middle-aged guy,
Mm-hmm.
and the the amount of people that are feeling depression, having mental illness, suicidal thoughts, attempting suicide, it just grows exponentially. It seems like it's just growing huge, and it's gotten to be a really big problem. And I thought,
Yeah.
if there's some way I can help, I can raise my hand
Mm-hmm.
and just say, hey, I've been there. This was my story. Maybe it might mean something to somebody else.
Yeah.
And so that's why the book got published. And so I just hope it ends up, I hope it just ends up in the right hands at the right time.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think, when we put something out there like that, I think it will reach the right people at the right time. We were talking a little bit before we hit record about my, this project for me, this podcast that I have. And, it's every time that I feel, because this is a project of love, right? This isn't something that I'm making money at. I'm not generating revenue. But and so sometimes my old brain, my corporate brain, pops in and says, "Hey, Adam, you should be doing something that generate revenue, right?" Because that's my qualifier back in the day of like, if I'm not making money in some kind of way, either for me or for the company, then it's wasted time.
Mm-hmm.
So that voice comes back in every once in a while, but then I'll have a conversation with somebody, I'll get a text from somebody, I'll get an email that says this episode really helped me, really gave me something to understand, helped me understand something about myself that I was searching for. And that's all the income I need, right? That's those beautiful moments that these things find the listeners or the readers or the person that needs that help, you know? And that's, but putting that stuff out there is something that I think is part of that healing journey in our own, right? Coming face to face and understanding that these are things that happen in our lives, but we're also bigger than those things. We can move past those things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have to like scrape the bottom of the barrel in our own way to understand that that's not where we want to be.
Right.
With, looking back at your journey now, through alcoholism and through because a lot of what you talk about, like drinking through our teens and 20s, a lot of us experience that in a very like joyous way. It's like that's just part of life. We drink,
Yeah.
right? We go out and we party, we celebrate to drink, we loathe to drink, we grieve to drink, right?
Right.
But there's this thing about drinking in general. Now, looking back where you're at now, looking back at like the depression lens, right?
Yeah.
Can you see some of those things, some of those markers, those triggers that happened in your life that led you through depression and led you through more drinking to mask the depression and not actually facing what you needed to face at those times?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I'm still, you know, I think I will always be in recovery, and I think for me that's a blessing. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
I feel like that gives me the inspiration to keep growing as a person and learning and evolving. So I'm still, to some extent, I'm still exploring a lot of my past.
Yeah.
But I think that what happened for me personally was these traumatic moments happened around the same time that I was experimenting and exploring with alcohol. And so the alcohol blocked me from being able to emotionally grow. So between, we grow physically to about age 18, but then between 18 and our late 20s, there's a lot of emotional growth
Right.
that happens. That was the time where the trauma hit me, and I really started drinking hard. And so at the time it was fun, but what I didn't know was that the alcohol was inhibiting a big part of my growth of myself. And so then I didn't process that trauma
Right.
in maybe a way that would have been more optimal. How we process trauma is an individual thing, and there are many different ways to go through it. But the only thing that you kind of have to do is go through it and process it,
Right.
right? And
Yep.
get to acceptance. I never did that
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason. I was young. I like and maybe I didn't have adult guidance around me. Who knows all
Right.
the reasons that it could have. But so then, as my life grows and my life gets bigger, and I'm now in my 30s and I have a career and I've got a family and I've got responsibilities and mortgages and talking about revenue. I want to make more money next year than I did last year. So there's life that happens.
Right.
I don't know that I was able to deal with life properly because of the trauma alcohol combination.
Right.
And so for me, whatever my chemical makeup is, that's where depression just took hold and owned me for
Yeah.
a while and
Wow.
really grew and evolved.
Yeah. And once it starts, it's hard to get a handle on that. Like from my own personal experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I became aware. So I've became aware that I suffer from depression within this year. My mom passed away in September, and so I had a lot of diagnosed with cancer in February, passed away in September. So it's kind of like 8 month, little swing there.
Wow.
And when my dad passed away in about 13 years ago, I was still drinking a lot. I was still very in a dark place. I wasn't meditating. I didn't do yoga. And so when I found out my mom had the potential of passing away, I immediately looked at the way I handled my dad's passing, which was not very healthy. And I looked at the ways that I could potentially handle it now, and saw all the peaceful practices I put into place and all like the bumpers, if you will, because life's going to catch us every once in a while, right? So it's
Yes.
good to have those practices already
Yep.
laid out. But it's still like, it still took me into a very internal place where I could look at a lot of these emotions. But when I started looking at that, I noticed myself in depressive states. And when I look back in my life, what I can kind of attach it to, where I started to notice depression kind of moving in and out of my life, was when I first started meditating. And, you know, when we first start meditating, sometimes we get this mirror put in front of us that shows us all the stuff that we're not really proud of about ourselves. And at that point in time, I wasn't equipped, whether through talk therapy or through friends that I had in life, to help me unpack that. And so a lot of that stuff that I didn't like about myself, I was an absent father, I was an alcoholic, I used a lot of drugs at the time, doing all these things that didn't reflect the path that I was walking towards, but I didn't know how to justify that. I didn't know how to rectify that with myself. So I just went into these depressive states. And so I can say probably every year I go through about 10 to 12 weeks of depression throughout that year. And it's gripping, you know, and as much as now I'm aware of it, I still find myself in it. Now I have more practices to help me understand where I'm at and pull myself out, but there's still those, I still find myself there,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it's for me the term that I use in my head and is walking down the dark path.
Okay.
And to me the end of the dark path is no longer living by your own choice, like
Right.
not just making it to 100.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, some sort of, you know, suicidal thinking and maybe taking action.
Yeah.
So that's the end of the dark path. And I've been down there and it's scary. And it is frustrating and it's confusing and it's isolating. And so, but like you said, I'm still human. I'm still susceptible to depressive thoughts and depressive times. And so I say I put one foot down that dark path from time to time because that's just part of who I am. But I never want to put 2 feet down that dark path because then that's when it gets scary. So, yeah, I think, and that's again why I consider myself to be sort of in recovery all the time. Is that I'm aware of that,
Right.
and I see it, and then I realize, oh, okay, here I am. What caused that? And what are the things that I can do? The healthy things, like you said, the healthy things to do to get out of it.
Yeah.
But you know, but even 12 years into it, I'm still learning and still experiencing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The emotional stunting thing for me was something that I don't think I was aware of until I quit drinking. And, you know, I think I had this misguided notion that, okay, I quit drinking, all my bad stuff's going to stop. Right.
Right.
You know, cause
Right.
that was the trigger, right? Is the
Yeah.
drinking.
Yeah.
But to your point, what you were talking about with the emotions, you know, since I started drinking heavily at like 20, 21, right before I had my first kid, and pretty much my drinking so in my eyes, I was never like a sloppy drunk. I never got drunk to the point of like, you know, blacking out all the time on a regular basis. There was definitely points, but I was drunk every day from the point of like 22 until I quit drinking. Like I drank every single day,
Yeah.
right? And so when I finally quit drinking, it took me about a year to get all that shit out of my system, you know. And but again, I thought I was like, okay, cool. I quit drinking, everything's cool. I could see clearly now. I could feel all the emotions, but that emotional stunting really pulled in, and I felt like I realized that there was this child that was driving all my emotions, because that's where my emotions stopped, was when I
Yeah.
was like 17.
Yeah.
The development of that, of how to handle fear, how to handle anxiety, how to handle depression, all that was just stunted by the alcohol. So when I finally got that out of my system, I think I went through an experience of all of those emotions on a very, very like strong level, because I'd never really fully embraced them before. And so that was scary for me too,
Yeah.
to just go back and like, okay, I've removed the thing that was the trigger in my life, but now I'm feeling all the anxiety and the depression and the sadness and all these things again, even stronger.
Yeah.
And it took me a minute to understand what my body was doing. It was basically teaching me, saying, okay, now you have clear mind. Now you have a clear head. You have a clear understanding of your emotions. Put them to the test, because you're going to have to understand how these emotions manifest in your body, and how this new Adam is going to handle these emotions.
Right.
Because I never actually cried. I never
Yeah.
actually felt depression. I never actually felt fear. I
Yeah.
just masked it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And you can, I didn't look at it at the time when I was drinking. I, up until the end, you know, the last 3 years or so, maybe 5 years, but for a long time, I only drank because of some sort of celebratory, happy point, or we're going out, live music, Thursday, Friday, whatever, right?
Uh,
I was never purposely drinking to mask. It wasn't like today was awful, I don't want to feel anymore. That's how it started out. Um, and and then what happened was I noticed that when I would get drunk, which was every time I drank, like I was either going to have one drink, I was going to have all the drinks.
yeah.
like
Yeah.
like there was no in between,
Uh-huh.
right? So I would have all the drinks, and I would get sad, and then that happened once every 6 months, then once every 4 months, and then it was every time, and then I got to the point after being drunk where I was either sad or mad. So now I'm mad at the world for whatever. I didn't know. I was just mad.
Yeah.
So then I was sad or mad. So then drinking, even though it started out as this positive thing, say at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or noon or whenever you started,
Right.
it ended up bad every time. And so and I just knew that I couldn't keep doing that.
Right.
But I didn't, it had become such a part of my life that I didn't know what else I was going to do.
Right.
And I think that's the people that have talked with in the last, let's say, 8 years, who are exploring sobriety or looking at becoming alcohol free, which I think is a great term that I just learned about, by the way, going alcohol free. I think that's
That's a
an
great
interesting term to look at it.
Yeah, I haven't heard that before.
I just read about it about a month ago. A woman who, Valerie Valley, I think is her name. Anyway, she's a sober coach, and I read an article and she used the term alcohol free, and I thought that was so great. But either way, sobriety or going alcohol free, one of my biggest concerns and worries for them and hopes is, what are you going to do with your time?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much of your time has been spent planning the drinking, doing the drinking, recovering from the drinking. Now you have hours upon hours. And then, like you said, then that's after about a year, that's where you're emotional. Then all of a sudden, all these feelings are happening, and you're like, what's up with that?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? But, and then that's where finding those positive outlets comes into play. But I think that's what's, to me, that's one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing, for somebody who has realized that they don't want to drink like they used to. What are you going to do now?
Yeah.
That
was a hard thing for me to, because I came, so for my journey, I think I came to that question before I stopped drinking, and it helped me understand that I was playing a character, and the character that I played was the guy that drank wine every night. And it was something that at the time I was working in restaurants, and my staff knew I loved wine. They would bring me wine all the time. I had wine menus. I had wine vendors all the time coming and dropping off cases of wine. Adam, try this. You'll love it. Here's a case just in case. I'm like, fucking great, man.
Yeah.
I have wine all the time, right? And that became what people knew me as. Oh, Adam loves wine. We're going to get him wine for his birthday, get him wine for Christmas, get him wine to celebrate the achievements in work and all this shit. So I became the wine drinking guy. Right? I love my wine. And so when I started to think about what my life was going to be like without alcohol, that character popped in and be like, well, what are people going to give me for my birthday and Christmas? How are people going to celebrate me? I'm the wine guy. I'm the fucking wine guy. Right. and so in looking at, reading your book and knowing a little bit about your work history, working in sales, that's a very, very drink heavy kind of atmosphere, and I never worked in sales, but working in restaurants, there were salespeople all around us all the time trying to sell us stuff. Or when I worked for Red Hook, I had salespeople in part of my departments. And so that was celebrate. We hit the target. We're going to go drink. We missed the target. We're going to go drink. We're going to, whatever it was, we're going to go drink. Right. And so being in that industry also, and moving away from drinking, and with the understanding of like these characters that we play, was that something that kind of played into your apprehension maybe to stop drinking, being in the industry that you're in and having it revolve around so much celebratory drinking?
For sure. It's funny that you bring up gifts. I had this birthday so I was Jack Daniels was my thing.
That's right.
So I was a whiskey guy, and I had this one birthday, and 7 out of 8 presents were a Jack Daniels thing. There was a Jack Daniels cookbook. There was a Jack Daniels sign, T-shirt, so I was, Jack and beer, Jack and beer, shot of Jack and beer. That was, and that was years before I was deep into depression, but that hit me hard. Like, holy crap!
Yeah.
Is this all I am? I'm like, wait a sec. I thought I like play sports, right? I mean,
Right.
like I think that I'm a business guy, right? But is that all I am?
Right.
And and even though I asked that question of myself years before I stopped drinking, I just set it aside and just kept on going.
Yeah.
And so I was, in fact, I had a sales manager who who called, in addition to being the revenue team, he was like, we're the social coordinators of the company.
Okay.
It's our responsibility to take all the other people, the parts of the company, HR and accounting and engineering, and we're taking them out, and we're partying. We're showing them how to party because that's what we do well.
Right. That's what sales does.
And we need, right? So there was internal pressure
Wow.
in addition to taking clients out to ball games and nice dinners and maybe buying them a bottle of wine that they wouldn't normally buy on their own,
Yeah.
celebrating this, or just, so it was part of life. And so I I tried to go back into sales after rehab, and it was really weird. It was really weird. There was an event, we were going to have an offsite, and I knew there was going to be drinking, and I just couldn't go.
Right.
But I I kind of didn't want to admit, it was a company I'd just started working for. I kind of didn't want to admit to them that I wasn't drinking anymore,
Okay.
because then I was an alcoholic,
That is the
and then I
thing.
was a loser.
Right.
So, because it was still early in the stage where I still was struggling with it,
Yep. Sell the stories.
right? So I bought 2/5 of alcohol and I gave it to them to take on their offsite trip, and I made up some excuse because I knew that if I was going to go, I was going to drink for like 48 hours.
Right.
And if I didn't drink, then I was going to be a loser.
Right.
In my mind, this is what I'm telling myself in
Yep.
those early days of sobriety. So yeah, so it becomes a persona, and I think that's part of it. One is getting alcohol out of your system,
Right.
but the other is, those are the questions to me that were the bigger questions. Was, who am I? Who am I now?
Yeah.
Because I almost defined myself by Party Blue,
Right.
or Jack Daniels Blue, or so now what?
Yeah.
And I think, and I think this is a big thing for the type of environment that I was in, kind of a type A, athletic, try making money, go do a marathon, just go get her, always pushing. It started to play on if I wasn't that anymore, because that didn't feel comfortable to me anymore, who was I?
Yeah.
And really started thinking about my own self-confidence and self-esteem, and who am I?
Right. Yeah.
But and like you said, those are the big questions that finally, I feel lucky that I get to work on those. But at the time, the first time you start thinking about that stuff, it's scary and
Yeah.
big questions. And it's like, ooh, do I really want to go there? Can I go there?
Right. Yeah.
So,
That was when those questions first popped in my head. My immediate answer was, I can't work in this industry anymore. And that scared me because I'd been there for almost 20 years in that industry, and built myself up from hourly to regional operation managers, like upper management, all this stuff. And so I was tracking, theoretically on all the things we needed to, right? I had insurance, I had growth potential, I had bonuses I was catching, and all this stuff. And I was quote unquote good at what I did. I managed people well. I built teams well. I was very diplomatic on how I dissolved teams if I needed to do that, all this shit. But everything was revolved around drinking.
Yeah.
And I once I came to that conclusion, again, like you were saying, it was years before I could finally make the decision. But once I finally did, and I knew how bad it was going to get worse, right? It was already bad where I was, where I finally realized that, and it was on the track of becoming much, much worse. My only way in my head to deal with that is to quit my job and to leave that industry. And luckily, I had yoga at the time. I was doing yoga, and I had this passion about teaching that I hadn't explored yet. And so I had like almost a backup plan, if you will. It's interesting because like when I look back at my life now and all these tough decisions that I've been put in that I've had to make, I can see the buffers that were put around me, right? And whatever you want to believe in, your higher power of whatever sort, right? And so that that kind of idea came into my head of, okay, you're not going to you're not going to be successful in life if you stay where you're at, right?
Right.
You need to figure something else out. And now we've covered this buffer with yoga and this holistic kind of thing that you've now dipped a toe into. So if you remove yourself from this alcohol filled restaurant that you're the one that has the problem with, it's not the industry itself, right? I got to take myself out of it. And luckily now I have this holistic net to catch me in,
Mm-hmm.
and the beautiful yoga community that's very open and loving and empathic. And so it was very nice for me to be able to leave that industry and somewhat smoothly transition to something else. There were still a lot of rocks, a lot of bumps, a lot of bruises on the way, but it was very um, it was very easy transition in a way to get out of that and to get
Yeah.
into something different. But that was a hard decision to make, to get out of that, and because I put so much time and effort into that. I
Yeah.
have a family, I have people supporting, and I basically just pulled the rug out from all of that and said, no, I can't do this. My
Yeah.
health is more important to me than this.
Yeah. It's really hard, I think. And I still don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up.
Right.
But yeah, and I think um, one thing that I learned in my recovery and in writing this book was the difference between self confidence and self esteem.
Mm,
And self confidence is external. It's the skills that you have and the traits that you have. And self esteem is internal.
yeah.
It's how you feel about yourself. And because at the time I thought I was a good drinker, I thought that mattered.
Right.
And I was making more money than the average Joe. I thought that mattered.
Right.
And I was getting promotions and I could travel and all these sorts of things. And I was looking at that as what defined me.
Right.
And so breaking free from that was hard,
Yeah.
And then I was left with, well, then what does define me, And it took me years to finally just accept the fact that I'm okay just as I am,
Right.
like without the stuff.
Yeah.
But that was hard, and I wonder, and I think this was part of the reason why I wrote some chapters that I did in the book is because I wonder how many, and I'll just speak towards, I speak towards the people that are successful in business or enjoy external accolades in whatever they do.
Mm-hmm.
Should we begin to explore, is that are external things making us feel good,
Right.
or can we feel good about ourselves just on our own?
Yeah.
And can we find self-esteem and self-worth and self-value without all this external stuff? I think that's a
big
hard thing
challenge.
to explore.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to explore. But in my own experience, it's almost like once you spend your 20s and whatever amount of time chasing the top of the ladder, and then you bounce back and you focus internally,
Yeah.
I have found that so many more things open up. Your world becomes bigger externally once you become comfortable internally.
Yeah.
And so that was part of my recovery, was going through that process.
Yeah. That was the chapters on self-esteem really helped me a lot, and I thank you for writing those. I didn't really, I think I didn't realize my low self-esteem was as as impactful in my the way that I just am in life, um, until really kind of reading those chapters and ruminating about it. Because like externally, like you were saying, like, I achieved things, right?
Yeah.
All the external things that I needed were there, house, car, kids, blah blah blah, all the things. But I wasn't happy with who I was, even after I quit drinking. Right? This is like just weeks ago, and this exploring what actually makes me happy, what drives me to be the human that I want to be, what drives me to get out of bed every day, and it's taken me a while to really understand that I never really defined that for myself, and I was just kind of getting up and moving through life.
Yeah.
Like I had some goals I was trying to reach, I had some understandings, but I never really felt uh, internally that I was confident enough to do those things. It was just more of like this habitual, I'm used to doing things. If I don't fill my day with things, then I don't feel productive, And so what things am I going to do today just so I can check shit off my list? Well, sitting with myself and understanding that wasn't one of those, even though I meditate all the time.
Yeah.
So having self-esteem and building that confidence in yourself is such a big journey.
And I don't know if it's and I don't know that it's something that really, whether it's Americans or society or men or what, but it's not something that is really taught and talked about and explored because historically the examples for men are these tough hero or quarterback of the football team or CEO
Mm-hmm.
type guys, and you never know what's under, what's inside those people, what's under those,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's not an obvious thing like, oh, you hit age 40 or 45 or 50, now is the time to start exploring yourself.
Right.
How's your self-esteem, buddy? How are you feeling, right?
Uh-huh.
So we don't, it's, and so it is a little bit of a struggle, and you do need to find these communities like yoga
Mm-hmm.
or whatever community you're comfortable with, to help and assist you in that.
Yeah. There was an interview I watched a while back, with Pharrell, who's a music producer,
Mhm.
and it was it started off as a kid, probably this gentleman in his like probably early teens, 16, 17 years old, and it said this just showed this kid said, man, I want to be like Pharrell. I wish I had his talents. I wish I had his drive. Right, all the things that this person loved about what Pharrell does, and then it cut to Pharrell, and Pharrell said basically he's like, okay, you can have all that, but you also have the anxiety, you have the depression, you have the
Oh,
OCD to make sure that everything is perfect. You have all the nuances, all the quirks, all the things that make me go fucking crazy. You don't see that. All you see is the what you desire. So if you want all that, you got to take everything else with it. And we
interesting.
don't really understand that, Like I look at some of my mentors, like, man, I wish I could hold conversations like that guy. Man, I wish I could have I could terminate somebody and get a hug afterwards,
Right.
right? But you have to go through how many terminations and how many like heartbreaks of those conversations,
Right.
and see somebody's world crash down because you've just taken their job away from them, to find the way to still make them feel good about that. And that journey to do that is very hard on the human being. And like all those steps to get to where we think that pinnacle of whatever is, we don't realize all the work that goes into that and all the nuances of craziness that goes into that shit.
Right.
Right. And so like when we can really understand that as ourselves and understand like we've gone through some shit, right? I don't have to be Pharrell to have gone through depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. Like that's just me, who I am.
Right.
So the fact that I'm having this conversation with you, I have a smile on my face, I have a roof over my head. It's a fucking great day.
Yeah.
And those are those things that self-esteem, those gratitude practices now
Yeah.
that have really helped me to get to the point of appreciating just this conversation.
Yeah.
Appreciating the small things in life.
Yeah.
Not having to have a scoreboard that I'm like checking things off and I'm climbing the whatever ladder and I'm doing all the things. Hey, my kid went to school today. Fucking success.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I think, yeah. And that's, I don't know. I don't know if it's alcoholism or depression or a mental illness or whatever, but living, like not being here now in the moment and having gratitude for that, and either thinking about the future, like what should I be doing, to get this or that, or regret from the past,
Right.
right? Living in the past, living in the future. Um, Whatever caused that in me, that's all how I lived all the time. Was I was either freaking out about the future or grieving or regretting the past,
Right.
and one of the and like you said, just being here now in this moment is
Hmm.
amazing,
Right.
right? But boy, when you have depression or when you're drinking and that alcohol is swirling around in your head, it's really hard to see that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep.
So, um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I've been there for sure. Yeah. And it is one of the greatest gifts that my recovery has brought is being present and being grateful
There you
for
go.
sure.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
One of our, I'm pretty sure you know Tang, right?
Yeah.
Tang teaches over.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of our mutual friends, Tang, he's been my meditation mentor for about 12 years now,
Oh,
right? And
wow.
I just love this man to death. And one of the things that he taught me very early on about that presence, right? Because again, like the anxieties worry about the future, like you were saying, depressions worry about the shit in the past. How can we be present? Because in this present moment, nothing's hurting you, right? I have my breath, I have my peace of mind, I have my constitution. And so one of the things he told me was that your breath can never be in the past or the future. Your breath is always present.
Hmm.
Right? You can't breathe in the past, you can't breathe in the
Mm-hmm.
future. So if we focus on our breath and I sit and meditate, and what he taught me was feeling the breath leave my nostrils and brush across the top of my lip, and then when it comes back in, I have this cool breeze coming across the top of my lip going back in, and just focus on that breath because our breath is always here, it's always
Mm-hmm.
present. And that was one of those first things that I was taught to get me out of that depression, anxiety, like loop that we get
Yeah.
into, is just focus on your breath. And it wasn't like a light switch, okay, cool, now I'm just going to do that the rest of my life. But when I feel that depression and that anxiety and that non presence come in, I can sit and meditate if I have the time, but I can also just sit and just breathe through my nose and feel that presence and just remember, like, okay, I'm right here. I don't have to worry about 2 weeks from now when my kid's going to be here and all the Christmas bullshit and all that stuff. No, I'm right here. I'm right here in this moment.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's part of yoga for me,
Mm.
and especially and why I got into the hot yoga is because for me personally, it's physically demanding,
Yes.
even both hatha yoga and power vinyasa yoga, both types of practices are physically demanding when you're in that heat,
Mm-hmm.
and so to to first get into a pose and then to stay in that pose and maybe even stretch it a little bit more than you did yesterday takes complete concentration for me personally.
Yeah.
And then it becomes meditative
Yeah.
because and you can't even think about the person next to you, you can't even think about outside, before, after. You have to be completely in that moment, and then tomorrow and yesterday fade away,
Right.
and you're just right there, and that becomes a meditative. That's my favorite part of yoga, when I get into that. And then you're like, whoa, what just happened for the last 60 seconds or 2 minutes,
Uh huh.
right? And you're like, oh, okay. And then you get out a little bit, and then you get back into the moment. But that is why I fell in love with hot yoga, and why it's my core, one of my very core parts of my life, both physically and non-physically,
Yeah.
for my wellness, for sure.
Yeah.
It's such a, I just love it. I just really do.
It works. I work with a lot of people in recovery, different forms of recovery, whether it's narcotic recovery, alcohol, depression, and two things that seem to work help them a lot. I shouldn't say work, but help a lot is hot yoga, that movement active practice, because a lot of times, like, what I've seen with the people that I work with, they're intense, right? There's this intensity
Yes.
level behind them, and yoga can help activate that intensity in a healthier way. Can get those endorphins rushing, can get that blood cocktail moving without the toxins, right?
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing, because sometimes we do need that activation, right? And the other side of that is sound healing. Sound therapy has been very, very helpful for a lot of people that I know in recovery, because a lot of times, depending on your substance of choice, we activate a lot in our bodies that we're not really aware of. And so our bodies can become very, very stimulated or very depressed. And sound healing has a way of balancing a lot of that stuff out. Energy work in general does,
Yeah.
so the combination of yoga, which is an active movement, which helps with depression, because if we're moving our bodies, we get those endorphins rushing, we get our, brain cocktail going, and we're not as in those depressive states. And having that energy work helps with the anxiety, because we're quelling a lot of the overactive energy in the body, and we're kind of pushing it back into a more balanced state.
Yeah.
And so those two things have been really helpful for both me as somebody that's in recovery, and helping people in recovery.
Yeah. I think, yeah, you mentioned the energy work, and I'm still learning about that side of my person. But my aunt was a massage therapist, and she went to the University of Oregon in the '70s, and she was a good solid hippie.
Yeah.
And ended up on the Oregon coast for a long time, and she was, in my mind, was pretty early on in terms of understanding, of thinking about energy work and thinking about mind body spirit connection. And she was the one, she played two roles for me. One was, she was the first one that called what was wrong with me depression.
Okay.
So I was driving to work, and this had been going on for months, but I was bawling just driving to work, and I called my aunt, and she said, "Honey, you're depressed." And I thought, "What? What are you talking about?" So she was right, but that's a hard thing to hear.
Yeah.
When supposedly your life is going good.
Right. Yeah.
Externally, everything's good. Internally, you're sitting there on the freeway and you can barely even see because you got tears running down your eyes.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing that she did for me, was to bring that out in front of me and make me think about it, because that's the first step to then moving on.
Yeah.
But the other thing that she, with her energy work, was I grew up with playing sports, and then my career was sales, business, money, money, money.
Right.
And that's how you were measured. So and so like you mentioned, I have a chapter in my book called Scoreboard. And so that's how I lived. And she was the one part of my life when I was younger that kept, like, bringing my focus around to the non-material world, the non-material success, the non-physical health, spirituality, and that's something I'm still exploring to this day. What's spirituality? What's the spiritual world? What does all that mean? But she was the one, and so she introduced that side of well-being and wellness and self and the person. So when you talk, it's interesting when you talk about energy work. I always think about my aunt, because she was the first one that really brought that to my attention. And this was like in the '80s or something.
Yeah, before it was like buzzwords and stuff.
And now yoga and wellness and mind body spirit connection, and we're understanding the gut biome in relationship to the brain and all that kind of stuff, right? She was like planting those seeds a long time ago. And that's and that's part of Creed's living, is combining the physical health with the non-physical health. But so I love hearing more about energy work, because I still have a lot to learn on that front.
Well, and it's like that whole, it's the holistic, right? It's the whole body, right? The whole human being. How do we look at you as a human being and figure out the best pattern or the best path for you, for your wellness? I love being able to look back in our lives and see those little Easter eggs that were put in place.
Yes.
Whether or not we fully embraced and understood why they were there at the time, but when we look back, it's like, oh man, freaking aunt. That's right. You were way ahead of your time. 40 years later, and I'm doing all the things you were talking about,
I know.
I love that. I have people like that in my life that I look back when I was heavy into drugs and doing a lot of things, that nefarious kid shit. And that I saw, that I can look back and I feel these people that were just keeping me safe. You know,
Yeah.
that would give me like a little nugget to something to think about when I was in whatever space of mind that I was in.
Right.
A parent of a friend that was what I would consider the cool parent, but was actually like, no, I'm actually just to save your life. I'm just here to save your
Right.
life right now, you know?
Right.
And these little things, these little bumpers that we're putting in our path to keep us, you know, keep us safe while we just figured out life, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I like that term because there are, and um, yeah, and I don't know why. I guess it's just part of growing up that we don't appreciate it while it's happening. But I feel, yeah, I mean, I feel so fortunate for all of the bumpers that were in my life, because there's times I wonder, a couple of steps in another direction, and I might not be here sitting talking to you
Right.
right now,
Yeah.
and so I know for sure that this whole process that's gotten me here didn't happen on my own.
Right.
That's for sure.
Right.
That's for sure. And again, we get back to why the book.
Yeah.
So can I be a bumper for somebody?
Exactly.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yep. You never
Maybe.
know. And all of a sudden, like somebody reaches out and said, "Hey, this impacted me in this way."
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, wow.
Yeah.
I guess I am somebody's bumper now.
Yeah.
So how did Creed's kind of come out of that? So Creed's Living, how did this kind of was this already an idea that you had before the book, or was this kind of spurred from your recovery through writing the book and then?
It was actually, so it's interesting. It was actually a precursor to the memoir.
Oh, okay.
My initial writing was me making sense of, I have me trying to make sense and organize my thoughts because coming out of a suicide attempt, alcoholism, depression, like you said, with all these emotions, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And there's so much to learn and there's so much to work on. As it's like you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And so me trying to make sense out of recovery, wellness, myself, I began and sort of my sales and marketing experience. I started to play around with what are the different aspects of wellness, and it almost was forming a plan for myself for my recovery. What do I need to work on?
Right.
All these things I need to work on, and so I'll explain a little bit about what Creed's Living is. But it was taking a part of me that had existed my entire life. It was taking these seeds that sort of my aunt had planted around her viewpoint of wellness and health, and then reading that I did. And so there's really three aspects to Creed's Living. There's the health, quote unquote, healthy that I grew up with, which was pretty much physical health.
Okay.
It was, lifting weights and running marathons, and your weight mattered and your body fat mattered, and that's all that mattered. That's healthy.
Gotcha.
And so that was my initial, and I think that's still today what a lot of society thinks as healthy.
I thought that for a very long time.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, if you can run a 10K or if you can bench press this amount or if you look good in a bathing suit, you're physically healthy.
Right.
Or, I mean, you're healthy. And then as I'm reading and I'm learning about brain chemistry as it relates to alcoholism and any sort of addiction, I'm learning about spirituality and connection with other people, and I'm learning about emotions and emotional health and intelligence. There's these sort of IQ or EQ, sort of emotional quotient, not just IQ. So there's all these non-physical things that play into your health.
Right.
And I learned from my naturopath that I go to that enough bad emotional toxins can build up and manifest themselves physically. So there's a non-physical health and physical health that plays into it. So Creeds is an acronym for 6 parts of your life that I've sort of worked for me in terms of how I view life and living and recovery and lifestyle. And that And the six are, the acronym is connection, reflection, expression, exercise, diet, sleep.
Hmm.
So CREEDS.
Okay.
So with connection and reflection and expression, those sort of fall in the non-physical health realm.
Okay.
Sleep, diet, exercise follows in the physical health.
Yeah.
But they all play in each other, because if you're not getting enough sleep, you get emotionally drained, and you can, right? And if you're not connecting with other people, you may not want to exercise. And so they all play on each other.
Mm-hmm.
But creeds, but in my reading and research about what worked for other people, what helped other people overcome depression or overcome alcoholism, I kept hearing about the low percentages of success that's out there. A lot of people relapse in whatever addiction that they have regularly.
Yeah.
A lot of people set a goal to achieve some level of health, and it only lasts 90 days or 6 months, or maybe it's a year.
Right.
And the driving factor I kept running into was a sense of purpose. Why am I going through the effort to change myself so that I can grow and evolve, um, and be more content with who I am? Why would I go through that effort? It's hard,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're stuck in the restaurant industry, if you're stuck in sales, it's hard to make those changes. So you need a purpose, a
Right.
big purpose. And that's what your creeds are. Those are your beliefs, your value system that drives you. And historically, creeds have been associated with a religion,
Mm-hmm.
but the true meaning of the word is just your own personal belief system, your values. And today you could use the term mission statement,
Yep. Okay.
since that's a big. Creeds are your mission statement.
Hmm.
And so if you're going to go through the effort to stop drinking, to change your career such that you can be content and wake up every day thriving and happy, you need to find your creeds. Like, why am I doing this? Right?
Yeah.
Why am I making all these changes? Because it's one, it's scary, but two, it's hard.
Yeah.
And so that's what creeds living is. It's living by your creeds, the word creeds, but then it's thinking about those six aspects of your life, the acronym creeds as well.
Yeah.
So it grew out of some of my own personal experiences before my attempt,
Mm-hmm.
and it really started to take hold in my own research, reading and listening and talking during recovery.
Yeah.
And so the book Choosing Life, my memoir, the initial seed was really around creeds, that acronym.
Wow.
And then I wrote this big self-help thing that was like 500 pages.
Okay.
And it included some of my own experiences, but it also was like more of a self-help.
Mm-hmm.
And so I shared that with some people, and the feedback that I got was, well, creeds living could be good, but your story is the most powerful. So why don't you pull your story out and just share that first?
Okay.
And that's likely to help people. And then your creeds living thing go on forever, because it's a lifestyle. But so choosing life was a subset of creeds living,
Okay.
and creeds living grew from my own recovery.
Wow.
So now that's what I get to work on moving forward. Is It'll be a website. It'll probably be a book,
Mm-hmm.
that is talking about those six parts of life. And what am I reading? It's going to be, look at it this way. Let me do the research for you.
Okay.
I'll read all the scientific stuff because I love it. I'll read the books. I'll read the magazine articles. I'll take from 2 or 3 or 5 different sources,
Mm-hmm.
and let me boil down into 1,000 words something about connecting with people,
Right.
or something about self-expression, or the latest on exercise,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, because there's always fads out there. And
Yeah.
so I look at Creed's Living as sort of I love and I have the time, fortunately, to be able to read all this stuff and talk to all these people like you and other people who are in the recovery world. And let me just boil it down for you. And regularly, I'll share some new writing with you about what's going on in the world of sleep
Yeah.
or whatever it is. So that's what I'm going to be doing moving forward. But for me, it really was a reminder of you've got your physical health, you've got your non-physical health, and you've got your purpose.
Right.
And you need to keep those things in mind as you move forward with recovery or growth or wellness, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And, taking those moments to define what you're actually living for, I think is a huge thing. A lot of times we just find ourselves in life. Like I love one of the phrases in my corporate life that I used to love was being promoted to your point of incompetence, right? It's like, oh, I'm a good bartender.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you're going to manage. Okay. I'm a good manager. Now I'm a GM. I'm a good GM. Now I'm the president of the company. How the fuck did I get here?
Exactly.
Right. And a lot of times I think life happens like that for us. It's like all of a sudden I'm 42 years old and I'm like, wait, who's driving this meat suit? There's a 10-year-old driving this meat suit. Where did
Yeah.
that happen? You
Yeah.
know? And so like having steps to look at, reflect internally to find things externally, I think is beautiful. But the thing, what I love most about what you're doing here is, and in no way am I throwing shade at the AA program, but I love that there's different options now than AA.
Yeah.
Like I said, AA does really great things for the people that it does good things for, but some people don't want the religious aspect. Some people want a little more freedom in their own choices. So having another avenue for people to look at themselves and having a kind of a preset blueprint of saying, hey, how are you feeling connected? Have you reflected on yourself? How are you expressing your emotions? Having this 6 letter acronym to go through is beautiful for me, and I think that's just adding another level of opportunity for people to find the help that they really need that will work for them, not that maybe has worked for somebody else.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I am not, and I am not an AA guy.
Right.
I know it works. I think it's great. It's nothing against it. But for me, my wellness and my life, I didn't feel like it stopped at sobriety. I think there's an assumption in the alcoholics world where if you're just sober, everything's fine.
Right.
And I never that never jived with me. Maybe for some people it works, but I always felt like I was like clearing the alcohol out of my system, which, like you said, it takes about a year.
Yeah.
It's almost like you got to sweat it out, you got to pee it out, you got to if you've been doing it like I did for probably 25 years,
Right.
it takes some time. It doesn't just happen in like a month.
Yeah.
You got to clear that shit out.
Uh-huh.
But man, it feels so good. But all that does is then it says, okay, now let's get to work,
Yeah.
right? Like now let's start. What's really going on here? Like, and again, I thought that was an opportunity for me. Maybe that's why I didn't dive full on into AA. I was like, okay. And I think I was also so relieved to stop drinking. I had wanted to stop drinking for 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
maybe 5. My
Wow.
son was 4, my daughter was 2, so it had been at least 4 years when I sat there and I was like going, how am I going to be a dad? How am I going to show up at the soccer game at 9 a.m. and be let's go
Right,
when
yeah.
I'm hungover,
Yeah.
maybe still drunk? So it was such a relief for me that I had the ultimate reason to stop drinking, which was life.
Yeah.
The ultimate reason was such a relief. Oh man, now, okay, I'm going to stop drinking. But again, I knew there was more to do, more work to do, more exploring of myself that was out there. And creeds living, and even just the word creeds, like you just say creeds and you're like, ooh, purpose.
Yep. Totally.
Ooh, why am I doing this? And I'm still exploring that, and that evolves. I think I think there's some core reasons: my children, my health,
Right.
my wife, but there's some other things that sort of evolve, and maybe as you get older, or maybe as you explore something and you realize, man, that's not really for me. I'm gonna go down this other path and check it out a little bit.
Yep.
So it keeps you, but it keeps you like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And then if you start to have some self doubt, you start to question. You're like, oh man, I don't want to do this today. You're like, whoa, whoa, this is why you're doing it. This is a big reason. Okay, I can do this little thing like go meet with somebody or go exercise or eat a salad instead of burger and fries or whatever,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So I find just that word creeds, just keeping it in the back of my mind, sort of subconsciously, is just like, okay, oh yeah, this is why we're here.
Yep. Totally.
You know,
And when we do define that, then it gives us that purpose. Like when I first, just a recent example for me is, when I got out of restaurants and I started my own business and doing this podcast and all this stuff now, there's these doubts that pop in. Am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right path? But it's I had to clear out all of this uncertainty to be very certain that this is what I wanted to do. But even in that uncertainty, I didn't define it until I came into that clarity of like, okay, what am I actually working for? Right? What's my why? What's my definition of freedom? Right? Because if I just have freedom, I've always wanted freedom. Well, freedom is like anything can be a possibility. Freedom can be like overwhelming, right? Freedom can be decision fatigue. It's like, oh my God, like everything's an option. But when I took the time to define what I wanted my freedom to look like, what my days look like, what my work week looked like, that gave me something to reflect back on, to come back to when I got, say somebody came and said, hey, I want you to start a business for me and do this thing. Okay, well, that looks good on paper, but that's going to take me out of all these other things I've been working towards: time with my family, time with my kids, this podcast. So that's a no, because it takes me out of that. But I didn't have that blueprint before.
Right.
So having these things like your creeds is that you're taking the time to really define the way that you want to live your life and put purpose behind it, right? And when we can have that purpose, we have that thing to reflect back on. Hey, maybe I feel like drinking today. And I look back at my creeds and I'm like, oh shit, no, I'm doing this for X, Y, Z, right? I'm doing this for all these things, for myself, for my family, for my connection to life, for my connection to everybody, right? And if I take this drink, it's going to jeopardize all that. Is that worth it? No, it's not.
Right.
Like you were saying earlier, meditation was one of the first things that triggered me to know that I didn't want to drink anymore. And it wasn't that, the thing that correlated with me was that my morning meditations, I usually wake up every morning, meditate for about 45 minutes to an hour. I would find myself sleeping because I was so hungover still that I would give half of my meditation, if not all my meditation, to my drunken sleep. Right. And I would still get up. I would still like go through the motions. Hey, I'm getting up at 7 o'clock. I'm going to go sit on my cushion, set my timer, light some incense, and then I would just fall back asleep because I was just hungover.
Yeah.
And then finally I was like, well, why am I doing this? What's going to benefit me more, meditation or drinking? Clearly it's meditation for me. And that was one of those things I defined. I'm like, hey, I want to meditate.
Yeah.
This is something I want to do. So how am I going to get this out of my system so I can focus on my depth of meditation? But needed that why first, needed to have some kind of definition.
Yeah, the why is so huge. The why is huge. And sometimes, unfortunately, it knocks us over the head and we can't avoid it.
Yep.
And
yeah, one of the quotes that came out of so I did a 4-part series on suicide prevention and awareness. And one of the quotes that came out of that, I have a psychiatrist friend, and he basically said, it's not that we want to die, it's that we don't know how to live anymore.
Oh yeah.
And that really hit home with me a lot with the thoughts that I had and even the states of mind that I'd been in. It's like, I don't want to take my life, but I just don't know how to recover from where I'm at.
Yeah.
I don't know how to rebuild, like I've hit my proverbial like rock bottom and don't know how to pull myself back up. Don't know how to face the people that I've wronged. Don't know how to do all these things. Right. But when we have something that we can reflect back on, when we have some kind of steps that we can follow, whether it's AA, whether it's your creeds, whether it's your own personal just desire to live, right? We find that and we step back up and we enter back into life and we say our apologies, we reconcile what we reconcile, and we try to make the best we can of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah. And not knowing how to live, I like that perspective a lot. The biggest shift for me from having depression to where I'm at today is that when I was in depression, I thought that life was bad,
Hmm.
that life was a struggle, it was a hardship, and sure, every once in a while something good might happen, but over the course of your lifetime, it's just going to be hurdle, obstacle, and
Right.
life is bad.
Right.
Now that I have cleared alcohol out of my system and I've gone through recovery, I believe with all my being that life is good
Hmm.
and that people are good, that nature is beautiful, that, and yes, we still have bumps and we still have hurdles for sure. But on the whole, life is good.
Hmm.
And that, to me, if somebody were to say, how do you put depression in a nutshell, and not depressed versus depressed or depression versus wellness, life is bad, life is good, and it's an amazing feeling.
Hmm.
But when you're in depression, you can't see that.
Right.
You can't see that, and that's the biggest. That's the scariest part of depression is because now when I say life is good and life's beautiful and people are good and the mountains and the animals and the ocean is beautiful,
Yeah.
I'm like, they think I'm like some Tony Robbins,
Right.
dude, you're, no way is it like that, right?
Uh-huh.
And I just keep saying it because I believe it with all my heart that a well human being sees life as good.
Yes.
And depression, it just has gray, you're wearing gray glasses and you
Hmm.
just can't see that. And so it's, and now, yeah, and then you know how to live life because you see it in a different perspective,
Yep.
Yeah.
Some of the people that I know and that I've met in my life that have that outlook that life is good, life is great, gratitude for life, have been through the hardships of life
Hmm.
and have found their way through it.
Yeah.
Have found their reason to live, have found their reason to keep going, have found their reason to stand back up. You know, there's definitely the facade of like, we can just say life is good and not really understand it. But the people that I've met that really do have that outlook in life have been through some shit and
Yeah.
have found their reason. And that's, I think, I hope that we can get away from the lessons in life where we have to go through
I
that stuff to
know.
really understand it. But when we do pull ourselves back up from those dark places and we can find that path that makes sense to us, there's a beauty in that. There's a rationalization of like, no, I do want to live. I'm choosing to live. I'm
Yeah.
choosing this life. I'm making sure that my life is going to be going forward
Yeah.
and be growing,
Yeah.
and not just going to be something that I whatever away, drink away, drug away, sex away, whatever our vices of choice,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. This book came out on September 1st, around Suicide Prevention Month,
Okay.
because so that was part of my driving force. Was I learned in the United States that there's more death by suicide than death by homicide
Wow.
right now in America, and
Wow.
it's growing faster than the population rate is growing. So I was so happy to see that you were doing that work around suicide prevention in September,
Thank you.
because it's scary
Yeah.
it's scary because we don't understand it,
Right. Right.
and again, that's one reason why your podcast is so great, because we don't talk about it. It's a weird topic
It is.
to talk about,
Yeah.
and you're so open with your suicidal thoughts, and it's just so great because we need to normalize, we need to accept the fact. This is one thing that I would love to see us get to as society is this acceptance that depression is is it doesn't discriminate. It's non-discretionary. It doesn't care how much or how little you have of anything,
Right.
including years, right? It doesn't. It can creep up on you, or it can smack you over the head, and so then you reduce the stigma. You can say it shouldn't happen to me,
Right.
or how can that person have depression? No way. Look at their life.
Right.
Well, depression doesn't care.
Yep. Exactly.
Depression doesn't care what your life's like. So, almost like, it's almost like COVID, right? Somebody gets COVID, you don't sit there and say, "Oh, you're stupid," right? You're like, "Dude, unlucky. How'd you get it?"
Yeah.
And it's almost, versus say 30 or 40 years ago, cancer. Like cancer used to be, ooh, shh.
Right. Yeah.
And now we have F cancer,
Yep.
fuck cancer.
Yep.
We have
Ribbons for it.
t-shirts, right?
Yep.
And we're like, and you don't blame that person for getting cancer. You
Right.
don't think they're a loser, and they don't think. I'm sure that there are some thoughts like, how did this happen to me? But on the whole,
Right.
it's just happened,
Yep.
and we'll deal with it the best we can. Would love to see us get to that point with depression
I
and
agree.
other mental illnesses, whether it's bipolar, whether it's manic, anxiety, whatever. Let's get to that point of, and so when you're able to talk about your suicidal thoughts, you're like, wait a sec, dude, Adam's a great dude. It happens to him. Well, maybe I shouldn't feel so bad if it happens to me.
Right. Right.
So,
Because yeah, like a lot of those stories that we tell ourselves in our head, like I'm weak because I think like this, or how can I be that person, and all this shit. It's like, well, when for my path, the more I started to open up about it, the more I started to hear other people saying, well, I think like that too. I have those thoughts. I'm like, okay, cool, all right, well, let's talk about that, right? Because what I'm hearing now is a lot of the populace has these thoughts. Whether we act on them or not is our own thing, right? But the thought itself can create a story which can lead to depression, which can lead to anxiety. But if we just understand that it's just a thought, all these thoughts pass through our head all the time. Sometimes we cling on to some, sometimes they just pass by and you're like, well, that was fucking weird, right? But still, it's just a thought, right? The fact that you're having that thought can be something we talk about, and the more we talk about it, then we can realize, I'm not that thought. I'm not that. It's just a thought.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that was interesting. That's just going to pass by.
Yeah.
But when we start to create that story, then we feel, oh my God, now am I suicidal? Am I this thing? Am I this stigma? No, it was just a thought, right? But if we can open the atmosphere up to where we can talk about this stuff, depression, anxiety, fuck, menstrual cycles, abortion, right? All these things that are like, oh, we shouldn't talk about them. No, let's talk about it. You know, let's put it shit out there so we don't feel so weird about it when they come up, because it's a natural part of life.
yeah, yes. Oh my gosh, yes. That's so great. I love that. Yeah, we have to. The what you said about the thoughts. I say that about emotions too. Emotions are.
Yeah.
That's it. They're not good. They're not bad. They just are.
Yeah.
Anger can be a positive emotion if it's purposed in the right direction, right? Happiness could be bad if it's the result of something maybe that that you did
Yeah.
incorrectly.
Yep.
So emotions just are, and let's not judge them. Let's label them, and maybe we need to talk about them. And let's define them the best that we can, not just fine or bad, but let's really try and define that emotion. And it's and it's the same thing with thoughts too. Let's understand what they are. Let's try and define them. And if we're concerned about them, well, let's look at how did we get to that thought or emotion.
Right.
And what did we do with that thought or emotion? What action did we take after that? Is that something that we're okay with? Well, I can be pissed as hell because I haven't talked to somebody about my emotion. And so finally I'm so upset. I'm like, I call my best friend and I'm like, dude, I finally got to tell you how I'm feeling.
Right.
That anger was positive. That was a positive emotion because it forced you to do something healthy.
Wow. Yeah.
So don't look at anger as negative. It's just an emotion. How did you get there, and what are you going to do with it? And so, yeah, they just are. They just are. They don't. Same thing with alcoholism. I talk about this in my book, and it's a wish that we wouldn't use the term alcoholic.
Right.
We would say he has alcoholism or she has alcoholism. Not that she's an alcoholic, because it doesn't define us. I have alcoholism. I'm not an alcoholic.
Right.
I'm blue.
Right. Yeah.
I have alcoholism. So our thoughts, our emotions they are part of who we are, but they don't define who we are.
Right.
So
And the way that we speak about ourselves is something that subconsciously we feel whether or not we realize it or not. And like you said, I am an alcoholic. Well, that embodies me. That's who I am. But if I have alcoholism, that means I can set it down. I'm not it,
right,
right? I
right,
have depression. I'm not depressed. But if I have depression, I can set it down. I can release that depression. But if I am depressed, then that's just who I am,
yeah,
right? So it is about like how we approach the situation, how we word it. One of the things for emotions that I love, one of my favorite quotes for emotions is all emotions are okay, all behaviors are not. Right?
yeah,
Because if
yes,
we take, like you were saying, if we experience fear, if we experience anxiety has a lot of good information as long as anxiety doesn't take over.
yep,
Right? Anxiety can be like, hey, shit, did you realize you got to pay rent next month or in 2 weeks? Do you have all that money? Are your kids going to school or whatever? We have that anxiety, but it doesn't need to encompass us. But we listen to the message of what anxiety has, and then it's like, cool, okay, anxiety, you can go sit back down, and I'm going to take that information, and
yes,
then we'll go with it from there.
hmm,
But giving the breadth of that emotion to fully understand it and to experience that, and then find out what you want to do with that information when it comes in.
yeah, yeah. I think that's and I learned that from my I learned this concept of emotions are from my therapist, and I went to personal one-on-one therapy,
Mm,
almost a weekly basis for about 6 or 7 years, I think.
nice.
After getting out of rehab and finding the right person, I went through a couple. You got to find the right therapist. I think that's one of the hardest things ge- about therapy is finding the right one. But
Yeah.
I found a guy that I worked with for years, and he exposed me to this idea that emotions are, that they just are,
Yeah.
and that was such a valuable lesson for me. Um, and it's something I pass on to my kids and anybody who will listen to it.
Yeah.
Just and I think it's a great. To me, it's a great way to live.
Definitely.
It's a great way to live.
Yep. And just I think it's beautiful that your vulnerability and your openness about your experience and how that will help raise your kids, help your kids understand like the little nuances of life that you had to find out on your own, right? And not like we can teach our kids everything, but when we can when we can humanize ourselves as adults to kids, especially our own kids, that I think that gives them a little bit of an upper hand as far as like I don't have to achieve this, right?
Yeah.
Dad's as human as I am. Oh my god, I didn't realize that. That's awesome. That means I'm not like always looking up to what dad can be and how am I going to reach what dad is.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to just reach
Yeah.
what I want to reach
Yeah.
because this is my life. This
Yeah.
is my goals in life.
Yeah. And I think, but that the levels of suicide attempts, suicidal thinking in adolescence right now is
Right.
just off the charts. And so maybe, I don't know, I'm not an expert, I'm not trained in this stuff, but maybe if adults, maybe dads, could say, hey, I made a mistake, or hey, I'm feeling emotional, this emotion or that emotion, I'm down today, or I'm grieving this, or if they see that we're expressing these emotions and accepting these emotions and dealing with them in a healthy manner, could they mimic that? And could that help them? So that's another driving force for me to try and write what I can about wellness and personal growth is that um, the youth of America right now is struggling emotionally big time.
Yeah.
And what can we as some people with some experiences and years under our belts, what can we be doing for them? And we know that they don't love to listen to exactly what we say, but they watch us.
They do.
They watch us.
They
And
do.
so if we're doing the right things for entire wellness, not just working on our six pack abs,
Right.
but like if we're trying to do completely well, maybe they'll see that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Yep.
So
And that's there's I think Jung was the first person that really kind of brought this to the mainstream, but the idea of archetypes. And so as I'm 42 years old now, I'm entering the what's called the sage archetype. And that's I think in women or in feminine it's crone and masculine is sage, but basically we get to an age where our kids are now self-sufficient. Like they're starting families of their own, they're doing all their own things, but we don't have to put all of our time and effort into our kids. So now we can become the overarching matriarchal, patriarchal kind of like like the grandfather, the grandmother of the tribe, and where we impart that knowledge, where we finally have the opportunity to step aside and say, hey, this is life knowledge that I have. This is what's helped me in life. This is what's helped me understand what these emotions are. Here's the pitfalls that I've gone through, but this is me and this is my experience, right? And being able to share that with the younger generation so that they can, learn from what they want to. Like you said, like we could sit there and verbatim, I could tell my kids on blue in the face, like, don't do that. Don't put your hand on fire. It's going to hurt. Don't put your hand on fire. And then I look over there and she's got her hand over a candle. I'm like, well, you got to figure some shit out on your own, right? Yeah. But giving that opportunity for us to impart that knowledge and to be that bringer of the information and saying, hey, we've been through some shit. Here's some honest, just brutally honest things that have happened in my life. Not saying that you shouldn't do these things, but I want you to know that I've done them and they didn't turn out too well. So take that information as you wish.
Yeah. Yeah.
But bringing that back of that teacher, that this is just some life experience that's helped me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, it's weird. I'm a crybaby. I cry a lot, and there's that image of the tough dad,
right?
And I'm like, oh, what am I doing? Am I like being some weenie that like, oh? But I'll still side on the show your emotions.
Definitely.
Let your kids know that it's okay to feel emotions, and you feel how you feel. It's how you act upon those, and are you recognizing these emotions when they come in?
Yeah.
Or are you just reacting to them too much, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's that's the other side of recovery that I feel fortunate to have is I hope it's making me a better parent.
Yeah.
Because I've been forced to grow or die, kind of.
Yeah.
In my case, that's might be a little bit extreme, but I've been forced to grow. Is that playing out as a parent too? Because that's, like you said, that's part of us as we reach. Whether you have parents, I have some really good buddies that don't have kids,
right?
But they are for sure role models to other kids.
Definitely,
for sure. So it doesn't matter whether you got your own kids or your buddies have kids or you're an uncle or an aunt. You're a role model now as you hit 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. And so we got to keep that in mind too.
Most definitely, man. So, most definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, okay. So we have your book that you've written, the expansiveness of Creed's living that you're working towards. When do you think that you'll have, you said you wanted to write a book or like a workbook around the Creed's living. When do you think you'll have that?
Oh, well, I hope less than 10 years that it took me to write Choosing Life.
I have to say something real quick on that because like I said, I've been wanting to write a book for a while now, and I think it's been about a 3-year process for me. So hearing that it took you 10 years, I'm like, all right, good. I'm all right. I got 7 more years to go. I'm all right. I'm on track.
You're right on track. Right? Absolutely on track. But it is interesting now, having published a book, that sort of the magic behind the curtain of publishing a book. I've seen it. It makes it a little bit easier. I know what it goes from having a bunch of words on a page to making a book.
Right.
So, but I still have 4 kids. I still have the website that I want to write to, where I'll have maybe every couple weeks I'll put up a new blog post, a new essay. So I want to do that. It might take me 3 years, maybe, I'm guessing, but I have a lot of it written down. I think it just needs to get refined. But I hope it's not more than a couple, 3 years, because it's in me. I feel like it's there.
Yep.
I feel like it's the right thing to do. So hopefully it won't take too long.
Yeah.
I just loved to write. I found writing in my 40s. And I just love it. So I'm lucky I get to do it.
Well, your writing is very moving and it's very approachable, which I love. So keep at it, man.
Thank you.
You're helping people. You've helped me, and I can only imagine how many more you got under your belt before before you're done
Thank
with
you.
this.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Appreciate you, brother.
All right. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for spending time with Blue and I. Please check out his book, Choosing Life, and his website, Creed's Living. Also, please like and subscribe to the podcast and share it to those you think will benefit from it. Obeisance and love. We'll see you next time.